The government has announced that people buying new build houses in England will no longer be obliged to enter leasehold agreements. Anyone buying a flat or a house on a lease of longer than 21 years will also not have to pay any ground rent. Earlier this year, the Department for Communities and Local Government highlighted some examples of what ministers called unacceptable practices. Here are a few. A homeowner being charged £1,500 by the freeholding company to make a small alteration to their family home. A property which is now impossible to sell because the ground rent's expected to hit £10,000 a year by 2060. And a homeowner who was told buying the lease would cost £2,000 but ended up facing a bill of £40,000. Joining us from Hampshire is Andrew Burgess, Planning Director at Churchill Retirement Living, which specialises in developing purpose-built apartments designed to meet the needs of older people. And we're also joined by Sebastian O'Kelly from Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, part of the all-party parliamentary group on leasehold reform. I'll be speaking to him in a moment. But first of all, Andrew Burgess, what impact will these changes have on providers like you?
This will have a massive impact on people. Moving ground rents will slow housing delivery. There really needs to be a distinction drawn between the behaviour and activities of volume house builders and what has been carried on for many years in the retirement sector, where we charge a modest, transparent rent.
Mr. Burgess, we are struggling to hear you. Let me just try one more question to see if we can get rid of the crackles. But you can understand the impulse that the government has to try to protect people from the unscrupulous practices that we were just listing.
Yes, and we fully support the government in what they're doing, but they're throwing the baby out of the bathwater here. There are unintended consequences of the delivery of retirement housing.
Mr. Burgess, I'm afraid we cannot hear you. We see that you're talking to us, but it's so crackly, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop. Let's see if we can do any better with Sebastian O'Kelly from the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership. Not everybody behaves unscrupulously in the way we've described, Mr. O'Kelly. Isn't this an instrument with which to tackle the problem?
No, it isn't. It's absolutely excellent news for consumers and for leasehold owners generally who've been right royally ripped off by PLC house builders. It's a shame that Andrew got cut off by the technology there, because he was making the point that these ground rents are essential for the viability of some development schemes, which we've heard before and is complete and utter rot. Ground rents are not essential to any schemes. If they were, then leasehold houses would be considerably cheaper than freehold houses, which are sold at the same time. But Land Registry data shows that in fact leasehold houses have been sold for slightly more than freehold houses. They're not an important consideration for developers. Developers have had their argument with the Secretary of State during this review period, and they've wholeheartedly lost it. Ground rents are going to end. That's an extremely good thing for anybody thinking of buying a house, and very good news for first-time buyers who've been ripped off.
But surely they will be more reluctant if there is less profitability in it, there's less money to collect on an ongoing basis through these ground rents, and therefore they'll choose not to build as many properties at a time when we're in crisis.
Well, you can tell that to Mr. Geoffrey Fairbairn, the Chief Executive of Persimmon, who's in line to get a £100 million bonus, that his profitability is going to be affected. I'm sorry, this is just going to create a hollow laugh for anybody who knows anything about the house building sector. They've been taking us all for a ride. We fuelled a house building surge through the Help to Buy scheme. Taxpayers have been underwriting 20% of first-time buyers' mortgages, and developers have remunerated themselves accordingly. Sorry, create proper houses, sell them, don't create complex financial instruments out of people's homes. Sell them and go away.
But where does this leave people who are already in a leasehold property?
That is the really painful question. We estimate that 100,000 homeowners of both flats and leasehold houses are stuck in properties with very onerous ground rent terms, where the ground rent doubles every 10 years. Those properties are completely unsellable. We know that nationwide, HSBC are not lending mortgages on these properties, and we're constantly contacted by people whose sales have fallen through. They desperately do need assistance. It's an issue that's been raised in the Commons debate, which is taking place now. In fact, Housing Minister is just concluding his speech, and has been raised by a number of MPs who are all very concerned about this. It does need intervention. It does need sorting out. The people who bought leasehold houses should be offered the freeholds of these houses at the prices that they originally were suggested they could have them for, and the leasehold flat owners need their leases to be changed from doubling ground rents to something connected with inflation. So at least the properties can be sold. At the moment, you've got 100,000 people who cannot sell their properties. And of course, they need to move for work reasons, their divorces, there's all the usual range of human reasons why a household needs to move. And they're absolutely stuck through no fault of their own. They were sold a pup.
Sebastian O'Kelly, thank you very much. I think we've got Andrew Burgess back from Churchill Retirement Living. Thank you for persevering with us and getting past the gremlins. I don't know whether you could hear Sebastian O'Kelly, but he was saying the idea that these properties are not going to be profitable anymore if you can't charge ground rents is a nonsense, and that there's plenty of money to be made, as we've seen from the profits being made by construction firms.
I fundamentally disagree with him. What's happened here is that the government have carried out a broad brush approach, penalising retirement developers like us when we're paying the price for activities, unscrupulous activities carried out by some of the volume house builders. Modest ground rents have been a feature of retirement housing for over 30 years, and there's no reason why they shouldn't continue.
What is a ground rent for? What is a ground rent for? People could understand what a service charge is for because it's about maintaining the property, but what is a ground rent for?
It's an investment vehicle which allows us to generate income by the sale of the freehold. It then ensures that we are more competitive in the land market and that we can bring forward more development. The unintended consequence of this is that although we have a government saying it wishes to build more houses, it will actually slow down housing delivery. And it's very interesting that the Prime Minister made this her #1 priority. And I really do think the government need to reconsider their approach in respect to the retirement house building industry. We have more and more older people, an ageing population who have an interest in purchasing a retirement apartment, and this is a real kick in the teeth for the industry.
Andrew Burgess from Churchill Retirement Living and Sebastian O'Kelly from Leasehold Knowledge Partnership. Thank you both very much for bearing with us while we sorted out the gremlins.